Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. In the small, secluded village of Eldermere, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there stood an old manor house that had been abandoned for decades. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices tinged with a mixture of fear and reverence. The manor was known as Blackthorn Hall, and it was said to be haunted by the spirit of its former owner, a reclusive musician named Alaric Blackthorn. Alaric had been a prodigy, his music so beautiful that it was said to move the very stars. But he had also been a man consumed by darkness, and his final composition had been his undoing. The centerpiece of Blackthorn Hall was a grand piano, its polished ebony surface gleaming even in the dim light of the decaying manor. The piano was no ordinary instrument. It was said to be cursed, bound to the spirit of Alaric Blackthorn, and it was said that the piano only played during full moons, its haunting melodies echoing through the empty halls of the manor. The legend of the moonlit piano had been passed down through generations, but few dared to venture into Blackthorn Hall to see if the stories were true. The manor was a place of shadows and secrets, its walls lined with portraits of Alaric and his ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow you as you walked. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the only sound was the creak of floorboards and the rustle of curtains in the wind. But there was one person who was drawn to the manor, a young woman named Lila. She had grown up in Eldermere, hearing the stories of Alaric Blackthorn and his cursed piano. Unlike the others, she was not afraid. She was a musician herself, a pianist with a talent that rivaled even Alaric's, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. One full moon night, Layla made her way to Blackthorn Hall. The manor loomed before her, its windows dark and lifeless. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over the grounds. Lila pushed open the heavy wooden door, its hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The air was cold and the silence was oppressive. Lila's footsteps echoed through the empty halls as she made her way to the grand ballroom, where the piano stood. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined, its surface reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. She approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, and then she heard it, a single haunting note. Lila froze, her breath catching in her throat. The note hung in the air, vibrating with a resonance that seemed to come from deep within the piano. And then another note followed, and another, until the room was filled with a melody so beautiful it brought tears to her eyes. The piano was playing itself. Lila stood transfixed as the music filled the room, each note more haunting than the last. The melody was unlike anything she had ever heard, a composition that seemed to capture the very essence of longing and despair. She felt a presence in the room, a coldness that seeped into her bones. And then she saw him, a figure standing in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the piano. It was Alaric Blackthorn. He was tall and gaunt, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were dark and hollow, but they burned with an intensity that made Lila's heart race. He stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, and Lila realized that he was not entirely solid. He was a ghost, a specter bound to the piano. "You have come," he said, his voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I have waited so long for someone who could understand." Lila's voice trembled. "Understand what?" "My music," Alaric replied. "It is my soul, my essence, but it is also my curse. I cannot rest until it is finished." Lila's eyes widened. "Your final composition?" Alaric nodded. "I began it long ago, but I could not complete it. The darkness consumed me, and I was lost. But you, You have the gift. You can finish what I started. Lila hesitated. She had always been drawn to the piano, to the music that seemed to flow through her fingers like magic. But this was different. This was a connection to something beyond the mortal world, something dangerous and unpredictable, and yet she could not resist. Alaric guided her to the piano, his presence cold and unyielding. Lila sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. The melody that the piano had been playing still lingered in the air, and she could feel it pulling at her, urging her to continue. She began to play. The music flowed through her, each note a piece of Alaric's soul. She could feel his presence beside her, his hands guiding hers, his voice whispering in her ear. The melody grew more complex, more intense, until it was a symphony of emotion, love and loss, joy and sorrow, light and darkness. But as she played, Lila began to feel a change. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The music was no longer just a melody. It was a force, a power that seemed to be consuming her. She tried to stop, but her fingers would not obey. The piano had taken control. And then, just as the music reached its crescendo, Lila felt a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, her hands falling from the keys. The music stopped, and the room was plunged into silence. Alaric stood before her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have given me peace." And then he was gone, his form dissolving into the shadows. Lila sat at the piano, her body trembling. The room was silent, the air still. She looked down at the keys, her fingers resting lightly on them. And then she heard it, a faint, haunting note echoing through the empty halls of Blackthorn Hall. The piano was playing again. Lila's heart raced as she realized the truth. The curse had not been broken. It had been passed on to her. She was now bound to the piano, her soul intertwined with its music. And she knew that, like Alaric, she would never be free. The moonlit piano still stands in Blackthorn Hall, its melodies echoing through the empty halls on full moon nights. Lila is its keeper now, her music a testament to the power of the curse. And though she longs for freedom, she knows that the piano will never let her go. The piano that only plays during full moons. Deep in the heart of the kingdom of Eldoria, beyond the rolling hills and the shimmering rivers, lay a forest that no map dared to name. It was a place of ancient trees, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky like the fingers of giants. The locals called it the Whispering Forest, for it was said that the trees themselves spoke in hushed tones, their voices carried on the wind like secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. The forest was a place of mystery and dread, a place where the paths shifted and the shadows seemed to watch you. It was said that those who entered the forest never returned the same, if they returned at all. The Whispering Forest was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a place for the desperate, the curious, and the lost. And it was into this forest that a young woman named Ilara ventured one fateful autumn morning. Ilara had always been drawn to the unknown. As a child, she would spend hours exploring the woods near her village, her imagination conjuring tales of hidden treasures and ancient magic. But the Whispering Forest was different. It was a place of legend, a place her mother had warned her never to go. The forest is alive, her mother had said. It remembers, and it does not forgive. But Ilara was no longer a child, and her mother's warnings no longer held the same weight. She had heard stories of the forest, of the forgotten paths that led to places beyond imagination, of the whispers that could drive a person mad, of the treasures that lay hidden in its depths. And she was determined to uncover its secrets. She packed a bag with provisions, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, a knife, and a small lantern, and set off at dawn. The journey to the forest took her through fields of golden wheat and past sleepy villages. But as she drew closer, the landscape grew wilder. the air colder. By the time she reached the edge of the forest, the sun was high in the sky, but its light did not penetrate the dense canopy of trees. Ilara hesitated at the forest's edge, her heart pounding. The trees loomed before her, their trunks blackened with age, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the rustle of the wind through the branches. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The forest was unlike anything Ilara had ever experienced. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the sky was barely visible. The ground was soft beneath her feet, covered in a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves. And the whispers, she heard them almost immediately. They were faint at first, barely more than a rustle in the wind. But as she ventured deeper, they grew louder, more distinct. "Turn back," they seemed to say. "You do not belong here." Ilara shook her head, trying to clear her mind. She knew the whispers were just her imagination, a trick of the forest. But they were so real, so insistent. She pressed on, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the trees. The paths in the forest were strange. They seemed to shift and change, leading her in circles or disappearing altogether. Ilara marked her way with strips of cloth torn from her cloak, but even then, she found herself retracing her steps. It was as if the forest itself was trying to confuse her, to keep her from finding whatever lay at its heart. As the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. They no longer seemed to come from the wind, but from the trees themselves. Ilara could almost make out words, fragments of sentences that sent chills down her spine. Lost, lost, lost. Turn back before it's too late. The forest remembers. Ilara's heart raced, but she refused to give in to fear. She had come too far to turn back now. She pressed on, her lantern casting a faint glow in the deepening gloom. And then she saw it, a path she had not noticed before. It was narrow and overgrown, but it was there, winding its way deeper into the forest. Ilara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to stay away. But something about the path called to her, a pull she could not ignore. She stepped onto the path, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The whispers grew quieter, almost reverent, as if the trees were watching her. The path led her to a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any she had ever seen. It was massive, its trunk so wide that it would take a dozen men to encircle it. Its branches stretched high into the sky, their leaves a deep, unnatural green. And at its base was a door, a small, wooden door carved with intricate runes. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of such doors, of the forgotten paths that led to them. They were said to be gateways to other worlds, to places beyond imagination. But they were also said to be dangerous, for the forest guarded its secrets jealously. She approached the door, her heart pounding. The whispers had stopped, and the forest was eerily silent. She reached out to touch the door, and as her fingers brushed the wood, it swung open with a creak. Inside was darkness, a darkness so deep and absolute that it seemed to swallow the light from her lantern. Ilara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But she had come too far to stop now. She stepped through the door. The world on the other side was unlike anything Ilara had ever seen. The sky was a deep, swirling purple, and the ground was covered in a thick black mist. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws. And the whispers, they were everywhere, a cacophony of voices that filled her mind. "Welcome, wanderer. You have come far, but you do not belong here." Ilara's heart raced as she realized her mistake. This was not a place of wonder and magic. It was a place of darkness and despair. She turned to leave, but the door was gone. She was trapped. The shadows around her began to move, taking on shapes that were almost human. They reached out to her, their fingers brushing against her skin, and she felt a coldness seep into her bones. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in her ears. And then, just as she felt she could take no more, she heard a voice that was not a whisper, but clear and strong. Ilara! She turned, and there, standing before her, was a figure. It was a woman, her face pale and ethereal, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch across eternity. Who are you? Ilara whispered. I am the forest, the woman replied. And you are lost. Ilara shook her head. I just want to go home. The woman smiled, but it was a sad smile. The forest does not let go so easily. You have walked its paths, heard its whispers. You are a part of it now. Ilara's heart sank. Is there no way out? The woman hesitated. There is one way, but it comes at a price. What price? The woman stepped closer, her eyes piercing. You must leave something behind. A memory, a piece of yourself. The forest feeds on such things. Ilara thought of her mother, of the warnings she had ignored. She thought of the life she had left behind, of the dreams she had once had, and she knew what she had to do. Take it, she said. Take whatever you need. The woman nodded, and the shadows closed in around Ilara. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were being torn from her. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. When Ilara opened her eyes, she was standing at the edge of the forest, the sun shining brightly overhead. She looked down at her hands, her body, and saw that she was whole. But something was missing. A memory, a piece of herself. She couldn't remember what it was, but she knew it was gone. The whispering forest still stands, its secrets hidden deep within its shadowed depths. The forgotten paths still wind their way through the trees, leading to places beyond imagination. And the whispers still echo through the branches, a reminder of the price of curiosity. Ilara never returned to the forest. She lived out her days in her village, her life forever changed by what she had seen. But sometimes, on quiet nights, she would hear the whispers on the wind, calling her back. The whispering forest that hides forgotten paths. In the bustling port city of Velmara, where the air was thick with the scent of salt and spices, there existed a marketplace unlike any other. Known as the Bazaar of Forgotten Things, it was a place where the strange and the arcane could be found amidst the mundane. Vendors peddled relics of unknown origin, potions with dubious effects, and curiosities that defied explanation. But among the countless treasures and trinkets, there was one item that stood out. A mask of pure obsidian, its surface smooth and featureless, save for two narrow slits for the eyes. The mask was known as the Mask of Shadows, and it was said to possess a power both wondrous and terrible. According to legend, anyone who wore the mask would be transformed into a shadow, able to move unseen and untouchable. But the mask came with a price. The longer one wore it, the harder it became to remove. And those who wore it for too long would become shadows forever, their souls lost to the darkness. The mask had passed through many hands over the centuries, each owner meeting a fate as mysterious as the mask itself. Some claimed it was a gift from the gods, a tool for those who sought to right wrongs from the shadows. Others believed it was a curse, a creation of a malevolent spirit designed to ensnare the unwary. The truth, as with all things in the Bazaar of Forgotten Things, was shrouded in mystery. The mask's most recent owner was a thief named Kale. He had stolen it from a wealthy merchant who had kept it locked away in a vault, unaware of its true power. Kyle had heard the stories, of course, but he was a skeptic. To him, the mask was just another trinket, a means to an end. He planned to sell it to the highest bidder and use the money to start a new life far from Velmara. But curiosity got the better of him. One night, alone in his cramped apartment, Cal decided to try on the mask. He held it up to his face, its surface cool to the touch. As he slipped it on, he felt a strange sensation, as if the mask were molding itself to his skin. The world around him seemed to darken, the colors fading to shades of gray. He looked down at his hands and gasped. They were no longer solid, but shadows flickering and shifting like smoke. Cal moved to the mirror, his heart pounding. His reflection was gone, replaced by a featureless silhouette. He reached out to touch the glass, but his hand passed through it as if it weren't there. A grin spread across his face, or at least the shadowy approximation of it. This was power, real power. Over the next few days, Cale tested the limits of the mask's abilities. He discovered that he could slip through the smallest cracks, blend into the darkest corners, and move without making a sound. He used his newfound powers to pull off heists that would have been impossible before, stealing from the wealthiest and most well-guarded citizens of Velmara. He became a ghost, a legend, a shadow that haunted the city. But as the days turned into weeks, Cal began to notice changes. The mask was becoming harder to remove. At first, it took only a few minutes of concentration to will it off. Then it took hours. Then it refused to come off at all. Cal's body felt heavier, as if the shadows were weighing him down. His thoughts grew darker, more fragmented. He began to lose track of time, of who he was. One night, as he prowled the rooftops of Velmara, Cal caught a glimpse of his reflection in a rain-soaked window. What he saw horrified him. His form was no longer human. It was a shapeless mass of darkness, writhing and twisting like a living thing. The mask had become a part of him, its power consuming him from within. Desperate, Cale sought out a woman named Lyra, a renowned scholar of the arcane who frequented the Bazaar of Forgotten Things. He found her in her study, surrounded by books and artifacts. She listened to his story with a mixture of fascination and dread. "The Mask of Shadows is no mere relic," she said. "It is a prison, a vessel for a malevolent spirit that feeds on the souls of its wearers. The longer you wear it, the more it consumes you. If you do not remove it soon, you will become a shadow forever." "How do I take it off?" Kyle demanded, his voice trembling. Lyra hesitated. "There is a ritual, but it is dangerous. It requires a sacrifice, a piece of your soul. And even then, there is no guarantee it will work." Cale agreed without hesitation. He would do anything to be free of the mask. The ritual took place in a secluded grove outside the city, under the light of a full moon. Lyra drew a circle of salt around Cal and lit candles at each cardinal point. She chanted in a language Cale didn't understand, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The air grew heavy, and Cal felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were being torn from him. The mask began to crack, its surface splintering like glass. Kyle screamed as the shadows within him were pulled out, writhing and twisting in the air. The mask shattered, and the shadows dissipated, leaving Kyle lying on the ground, gasping for breath. But the ritual had come at a cost. Cale's body was no longer whole. Parts of him were still shadowy, as if the mask had left a permanent mark. He was no longer fully human, but he was no longer a shadow either. He was something in between. The mask of shadows was gone, its pieces scattered to the wind, but its legacy lived on. Cal became a wanderer, traveling from place to place, never staying long enough for anyone to notice the shadows that clung to him. He used his abilities to help those in need, becoming a protector of the weak and a thorn in the side of the powerful. But he always carried the weight of the mask, a reminder of the price he had paid. The Mask of Shadows still exists, its pieces waiting to be found by the next curious soul. It is a relic of power and peril, a tool for those who seek to walk in the darkness. But beware, the mask does not give its gifts freely. It demands a price, and once it claims you, there is no turning back. The mask that turns its wearer into a shadow. In the heart of the ancient city of Eterna, where cobblestone streets wound like serpents through a labyrinth of Gothic spires and ivy-clad buildings, there stood a bell tower that defied all logic. Known simply as the clock tower, it was a towering structure of weathered stone, its face adorned with a massive clock whose hands moved with a peculiar, almost deliberate slowness. The bell within the tower was said to be as old as the city itself, its bronze surface etched with runes that no one could decipher. But what made the clock tower truly infamous was its peculiar quirk. It never struck the correct hour. The bell would ring at random intervals, its deep, resonant toll echoing through the city streets. Sometimes it would chime 3 times at noon, other times 7 at dusk. The citizens of Eterna had long since given up trying to set their watches by it. They accepted the clock tower as a peculiarity, a quirk of their city's rich and mysterious history. But there were whispers of something darker, something unnatural that dwelled within the tower. The legend of the clock tower began centuries ago, during the reign of a tyrannical king named Alaric the Unyielding. Alaric was a man obsessed with control, and he sought to impose his will on every aspect of his kingdom. He commissioned the construction of the clock tower as a symbol of his power, a monument to his mastery over time itself. The tower was to be the most precise timekeeping device in the world, its bell striking the hour with unerring accuracy. But Alaric's ambitions extended beyond the mortal realm. He sought to harness the power of time, to bend it to his will. To achieve this, he turned to a mysterious figure known only as the Chronomancer. The Chronomancer was a sorcerer of unparalleled skill, rumored to have discovered the secrets of time itself. Alaric promised him wealth and power beyond measure in exchange for his services. The Chronomancer agreed, and together they crafted the bell that would sit within the clock tower. The bell was forged from a rare alloy, its surface inscribed with ancient runes that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. The Chronomancer performed a ritual, binding the bell to the flow of time itself. But something went wrong. The ritual backfired, and the Chronomancer was consumed by the very forces he sought to control. His essence was absorbed into the bell, trapping him within its bronze shell. From that day forward, the clock tower was cursed. The bell no longer struck the correct hour, its tolls erratic and unpredictable. Alaric, furious at the failure, ordered the tower sealed and the bell destroyed. But no matter what was done, whether the bell was melted, shattered, or buried, it always reappeared within the tower, its runes glowing faintly as if in mockery. The story of the clock tower became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. The tower was left to decay, its once proud facade crumbling under the weight of time. But the bell continued to ring, its tolls echoing through the city like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering beast. Centuries passed, and the city of Eterna grew and changed. But the clock tower remained a constant, a silent sentinel watching over the city. It was largely ignored, its existence relegated to the realm of myth and superstition. But there were always those who were drawn to it, lured by the promise of secrets and power. One such person was a young historian named Alara. She had spent her life studying the history of Eterna, and the clock tower had always fascinated her. She believed that the stories of the cursed bell were more than just legends. They were clues to a greater mystery, one that could rewrite the history of the city. Ilara spent months researching the clock tower, poring over ancient texts and deciphering cryptic manuscripts. She learned of Alaric and the Chronomancer, of the ritual that had gone wrong, and of the bell that could not be destroyed. She became convinced that the key to understanding the tower lay within the bell itself. One stormy night, Alara decided to investigate the clock tower. She had obtained a key from an old locksmith who claimed it would open the tower's sealed door. The key was ancient, its surface tarnished and worn, but it fit perfectly into the lock. With a creak, the door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase that led up into the darkness. Ilara climbed the stairs, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The air grew colder the higher she went, and she felt a strange pressure, as if the tower itself were alive and watching her. When she reached the top, she found herself in a small, circular chamber. In the center of the room hung the bell, its surface glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Ilara approached the bell, her heart pounding. She reached out to touch it, but before her fingers could make contact, the bell began to ring. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the chamber and shaking the very foundations of the tower. Ilara fell to her knees, clutching her ears, but the sound was inside her, filling her mind with visions. She saw the chronomancer, his face twisted in agony as he was consumed by the ritual. She saw Alaric, his eyes filled with madness as he ordered the tower sealed. And she saw the countless souls who had been drawn to the tower over the centuries, their fates intertwined with the cursed bell. When the ringing finally stopped, Ilara was alone in the chamber, her body trembling. She looked up at the bell, its runes glowing brighter than ever. And then she heard a voice, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from the bell itself. "You seek knowledge," the voice said, "but knowledge comes at a price." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am the chronomancer," the voice replied. "I am the keeper of time, bound to this bell for eternity. You have awakened me, and now you must take my place." Ilara shook her head, her mind reeling. "No, I didn't mean to." "It is too late," the chronomancer interrupted. "The bell has chosen you. You are now its guardian, its voice. You will ring the hours, but they will never be correct. For time is not a straight line. It is a spiral, a loop, a paradox, and you are now a part of it." Before Ilara could protest, she felt a surge of energy course through her body. Her vision blurred, and she felt herself being pulled into the bell, her essence merging with the chronomancer's. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the chamber. She was the bell, her consciousness fused with its ancient, cursed metal. The clock tower still stands in the heart of Eterna, its bell tolling at random intervals, its hands moving with a deliberate slowness. The citizens of the city have grown accustomed to its erratic behavior, but they no longer ignore it. They feel its presence, a constant reminder of the thin line between past and present, between life and eternity. Ilara's story is just one of many. The clock tower continues to draw the curious, the desperate, and the brave. Its cursed bell a beacon for those who seek to unravel the mysteries of time. But once the bell claims you, there is no escape. You become a part of its endless cycle, a guardian of its secrets, a voice in the void. The bell tower that never strikes the correct hour. Nestled in the shadow of the jagged Blackthorn Mountains, the village of Blackthorn Hollow was a place of stark contrasts. The land was rich with iron ore, and the villagers were skilled blacksmiths, their forges burning day and night. The weapons and tools they crafted were renowned throughout the land, prized for their strength and durability. But there was one forge that stood apart from the rest, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. The forge was located on the outskirts of the village, at the edge of a dense, foreboding forest. It was an ancient structure, its stone walls blackened by centuries of soot and flame. The villagers called it the Cursed Forge, and they avoided it at all costs. It was said that the forge was haunted by the spirit of its original owner, a master blacksmith named Kyle the Unyielding. Kyle had been a man of unparalleled skill, but his ambition had led him down a dark path. He had sought to create weapons of unimaginable power, and in his quest, he had made a pact with a malevolent force. The details of the pact were lost to time, but the consequences were not. Kyle had disappeared one night, leaving behind a forge filled with cursed weapons, blades that thirsted for blood, hammers that shattered the wills of those who wielded them, and armor that turned its wearers into monsters. The villagers had sealed the forge, hoping to contain the evil within. But the forge was not so easily tamed. The first person to rediscover the cursed forge was a young blacksmith named Garrick. He had grown up hearing the stories of Kale and his cursed creations, but like many young men, he was drawn to the allure of forbidden knowledge. Garrick was ambitious, eager to prove himself as a master blacksmith, and he believed that the secrets of the cursed forge could help him achieve his goals. One moonless night, Garrick ventured to the forge, carrying only a lantern and a set of lockpicks. The door was sealed with a heavy iron lock, but it was no match for Garrick's skill. He slipped inside, the air thick with the scent of ash and metal. The forge was exactly as the stories had described, a place frozen in time. The anvil was still warm to the touch, and the tools were arranged as if Kale had just stepped away. Garrick's eyes were drawn to the weapons that lined the walls. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, their designs both beautiful and terrifying. He reached for a sword, its blade etched with runes that seemed to glow in the dim light. As his fingers closed around the hilt, he felt a surge of power, a connection to something ancient and dark. But the moment he lifted the sword, the forge came alive. The flames in the furnace roared to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, and Garrick heard a voice, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Who dares disturb my forge?" Garrick spun around, his heart pounding. Standing before him was a figure clad in blacksmith's garb, his face obscured by the shadows of his hood. But there was no mistaking who it was, Kale the Unyielding. I didn't mean to intrude," Garrick stammered. "I only wanted to learn." Kyle stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You seek knowledge? Then you shall have it. But knowledge comes at a price." Before Garrick could respond, Kyle reached out and placed a hand on his forehead. A searing pain shot through Garrick's skull, and he fell to his knees, clutching his head. Visions flooded his mind, visions of fire and blood, of battles fought and lost, of weapons that devoured their wielders. When the pain finally subsided, Garrick was alone in the forge, the sword still clutched in his hand. Garrick returned to the village, a changed man. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and his eyes held a darkness that hadn't been there before. But his skill as a blacksmith had grown exponentially. The weapons he crafted were unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. Blades that never dulled, armor that seemed to move with its wearer, and arrows that never missed their mark. At first, the villagers celebrated Garrick's newfound talent, but it wasn't long before they began to notice the changes in him. He spent more and more time at the cursed forge, often disappearing for days at a time. And the weapons he created, while powerful, had a strange effect on those who wielded them. Soldiers who carried his blades became ruthless and bloodthirsty, their humanity slipping away with each battle. Farmers who used his tools became obsessed with their work, neglecting their families and their health. The villagers grew fearful, and whispers of a curse began to spread. But Garrick was beyond their reach. He was consumed by his work, driven by a force he could not control. The spirit of Kale had taken hold of him, guiding his hands and feeding his ambition. One night, a group of villagers decided to confront Garrick. They marched to the cursed forge, armed with torches and weapons, determined to put an end to the curse. But when they arrived, they found the forge empty. The tools were scattered, the furnace cold, and the weapons were gone. Garrick was nowhere to be found. The villagers searched the surrounding forest, but there was no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The only clue they found was a single blood-stained hammer lying at the base of the anvil. It was the same hammer Garrick had used to craft his cursed weapons. Years passed and the cursed forge was once again sealed, its secrets buried beneath layers of ash and rust. But the legend of Cale and Garrick lived on, a cautionary tale for those who sought power at any cost. The villagers of Blackthorn Hollow continued to craft their weapons and tools, but they did so with a newfound respect for the dangers of ambition. The cursed forge still stands at the edge of the forest, its stone walls blackened by soot and flame. It is a place of darkness and despair, a reminder of the thin line between creation and destruction. And though the forge is silent, there are those who claim to hear the sound of hammer on anvil on moonless nights, and to see the flicker of flames through the cracks in the door. The haunted forge where cursed weapons are made, deep within the heart of the Blackwood Forest, where the sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, there stood a tree unlike any other. It was an ancient oak, its gnarled branches twisting and curling like the fingers of a skeletal hand. The bark was blackened, as if scorched by some long-forgotten fire, and its roots sprawled out like serpents, digging deep into the earth. But what truly set this tree apart were the objects that hung from its branches. Dozens of them, swaying gently in the breeze, their shapes unmistakable. They were bodies. The villagers of Blackwood called it the hanging tree, and they avoided it at all costs. It was said that the tree was cursed, a place where lost souls were drawn to hang, their spirits trapped for eternity. No one knew how long the tree had been there, or why it had become a beacon for the damned, but the stories were enough to keep even the bravest souls away. The first recorded account of the hanging tree dated back centuries, to a time when the forest was still uncharted territory. A group of explorers had ventured into the woods, seeking to map the land and uncover its secrets. They never returned. Months later, a search party found their remains hanging from the tree, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. The leader of the search party, a man named Elias Grayson, documented the discovery in his journal. "We found them at dusk, their bodies swaying like macabre ornaments. The tree itself seemed alive, its branches creaking as if in laughter. We cut them down, but the moment their bodies touched the ground, the forest came alive. The wind howled, the shadows moved, and we heard whispers, voices calling our names. We fled, leaving the bodies behind. I do not know what evil resides in that tree, but I pray no one else is foolish enough to seek it out." Elias's journal became a cautionary tale, passed down through generations. But despite the warnings, there were always those who were drawn to the hanging tree, driven by curiosity, desperation, or something darker. One such person was a young woman named Eleanor. She had grown up in Blackwood, hearing the stories of the hanging tree from her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a superstitious woman, filling Eleanor's head with tales of restless spirits and cursed places. But Eleanor was a skeptic. She didn't believe in curses or lost souls. To her, the hanging tree was just a tree. A strange and eerie one, yes, but nothing more. That all changed the night her brother disappeared. Thomas had always been reckless, the kind of person who thrived on danger. He had laughed at the stories of the hanging tree, calling them nonsense. "It's just a tree," he had said. "What's the worst that could happen?" But when Thomas failed to return home after a night of drinking, Eleanor knew something was wrong. She searched the village, asking everyone if they had seen him, but no one had. The last person to see him was the bartender, who said Thomas had mentioned going into the forest to see the hanging tree for himself. Eleanor's heart sank. She knew she had to find him. The forest was unnaturally quiet as Eleanor made her way to the hanging tree. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the occasional rustle of branches overhead. The air grew colder the deeper she went, and she felt a strange pressure, as if the forest itself were watching her. When she finally reached the tree, her worst fears were realized. Thomas was there, his body hanging from one of the branches. His face was pale, his eyes wide open, staring into nothingness. Eleanor screamed, rushing to him, but as she got closer, she noticed something strange. His body wasn't moving. It was perfectly still, as if frozen in time. She reached out to touch him, but the moment her fingers brushed his skin, the forest came alive. The wind howled, the branches of the hanging tree creaked and groaned. And Eleanor heard whispers, voices calling her name. She turned to run, but the shadows seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a circle of darkness. And then she saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms faint and translucent. They were the lost souls, the ones who had been drawn to the hanging tree and never left. Their faces were twisted in anguish, their eyes hollow and empty. They reached out to Eleanor, their fingers brushing against her skin, and she felt a coldness seep into her bones. "Join us," they whispered. "Join us." Eleanor screamed, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The lost souls surrounded her, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. She felt herself being pulled toward the tree, her feet dragging across the ground as if guided by an unseen force. Just as she was about to give in to the darkness, a voice cut through the chaos. "Eleanor!" It was her grandmother. The old woman stood at the edge of the clearing, her face pale but determined. In her hands, she held a small, leather-bound book, the Journal of Elias Grayson. "You have to fight it," her grandmother shouted. "The tree feeds on fear. You have to resist." Eleanor focused on her grandmother's voice, using it as an anchor to pull herself back from the brink. She closed her eyes, blocking out the whispers, and concentrated on her breathing. Slowly, the coldness began to fade, and the whispers grew quieter. When she opened her eyes, the lost souls were gone. The forest was silent once more, and the hanging tree stood still, its branches empty. Thomas's body was gone. Eleanor never returned to the hanging tree. She moved away from Blackwood, leaving the forest and its dark secrets behind. But the experience stayed with her, haunting her dreams and shaping her life in ways she couldn't fully understand. The hanging tree still stands in the heart of the Blackwood forest, its branches heavy with the weight of lost souls. It is a place of darkness and despair, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead. And though the villagers continue to avoid it, there are always those who are drawn to its cursed embrace. Their fates sealed the moment they step into its shadow. The tree where lost souls hang, in the heart of the bustling city of Eldridge, nestled between an old bookstore and a forgotten antique shop, stood a peculiar building. It was an unassuming structure, its facade weathered by time, with peeling paint and a creaky wooden sign that simply read, "The Velvet Door." The building had been there for as long as anyone could remember, but no one ever seemed to enter or leave. It was as if the place existed in a state of perpetual limbo, ignored by the world around it. But to those who paid attention, there was something undeniably strange about the Velvet Door. The windows were always dark, no matter the time of day, and the air around it seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. People who walked past it often reported feeling a sudden chill, or the sensation of being watched, even though the building appeared to be empty. The truth about the Velvet Door was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. It was not a shop, nor a home, nor anything so mundane. It was a doorway, a portal to the nightmares of others. The first person to discover the truth was a young woman named Clara. She had moved to Eldridge a few months prior, seeking a fresh start after a painful breakup. One rainy evening, as she hurried home from work, she noticed the door of the Velvet Door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed it open, stepping inside. The interior was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were covered in deep red velvet, giving the space a warm, almost suffocating atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something metallic, like blood. In the center of the room stood a single ornate door. It was carved with intricate patterns, swirling vines and grotesque faces that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them too long. Clara hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She felt a strange pull, as if the door were calling to her. Against her better judgment, she turned the knob and stepped through. The world around her shifted instantly. She was no longer in the velvet-lined room, but in a dark, crumbling hallway. The walls were damp, the air thick with the stench of decay. She could hear faint whispers, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Her heart raced as she realized she was not alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with hollow eyes and a twisted, grotesque smile. He reached out to her, his fingers long and bony, and Clara screamed. She turned and ran, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in her ears. Just as she felt she could take no more, she stumbled and fell, and found herself back in the velvet-lined room, gasping for breath. The ornate door was closed, as if nothing had happened, but Clara knew better. She had seen something real, something terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Clara couldn't shake the memory of what she had experienced. She tried to convince herself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress. But deep down, she knew it was real, and she couldn't resist the urge to go back. The second time she entered the velvet door, she was more prepared, or so she thought. This time, the ornate door led her to a different nightmare. She found herself in a vast, empty field under a blood-red sky. The ground was littered with broken toys, their faces cracked and twisted into expressions of agony. In the distance, she saw a child, a little girl with matted hair and a tattered dress. The girl turned to Clara, her eyes black and empty, and began to scream. Clara ran, but the field seemed to go on forever. The screams followed her, growing louder and more desperate, until she thought her ears would bleed. Just as she felt she was about to collapse, she was back in the velvet-lined room, trembling and drenched in sweat. Clara's experiences with the velvet door became an obsession. She returned again and again, each time stepping through the ornate door and into a new nightmare. She saw things that defied explanation: a city made of flesh, a forest where the trees whispered secrets, a labyrinth filled with mirrors that showed her twisted versions of herself. Each nightmare was more horrifying than the last, but Clara couldn't stop. She was drawn to the door, compelled to uncover its secrets. It wasn't until her fifth visit that she realized the truth. The nightmares she was experiencing weren't her own. They belonged to someone else. She discovered this when she found herself in a nightmare that felt eerily familiar. It was a small, dimly lit room with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering light bulb. In the corner sat a man, his face buried in his hands. Clara recognized him. It was her ex-boyfriend, Daniel. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding. "Daniel?" she whispered. He looked up, his eyes filled with terror. "Clara, how are you here? This is my dream, my nightmare." Clara's mind raced. She realized that the velvet door wasn't just a portal to random nightmares. It was a gateway into the nightmares of others. Each time she stepped through the door, she was entering someone else's darkest fears. As Clara delved deeper into the mysteries of the velvet door, she began to uncover its history. She learned that the building had been constructed over a century ago by a man named Elias Blackwood, a reclusive inventor who had been obsessed with the nature of dreams. Blackwood had created the doorway as a way to explore the human psyche, to understand the fears that haunted people in their sleep. But something had gone wrong. The doorway had become a conduit for nightmares, a place where the fears of the living and the dead intertwined. Clara also discovered that the velvet door was not without its dangers. Those who entered the nightmares of others risked losing themselves, their minds fractured by the horrors they witnessed. Some who had entered the doorway had never returned, their souls trapped in the nightmares forever. Despite the risks, Clara couldn't stop. She was determined to understand the doorway, to uncover its secrets and perhaps even find a way to close it. But the more she explored, the more she realized that the velvet door was not just a portal. It was alive. It fed on fear, growing stronger with every nightmare it consumed, and it had its sights set on Clara. One night, Clara entered the velvet door for what she vowed would be the last time. She stepped through the ornate door and found herself in a nightmare unlike any she had experienced before. It was her own. She was back in her childhood home, but it was twisted and distorted, the walls oozing black sludge. The air was thick with the scent of rot, and the floor was littered with broken mirrors. In the center of the room stood a figure, a version of herself, but with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure said, its voice a chilling echo of Clara's own. Clara tried to run, but the walls closed in around her, the mirrors reflecting endless versions of herself, each more grotesque than the last. The figure advanced, its hands reaching for her, and Clara realized with horror that she was trapped in her own nightmare. Just as the figure's fingers closed around her throat, Clara woke up, or so she thought. She was back in the velvet-lined room, but something was different. The air was colder, the walls darker. The ornate door was gone, replaced by a mirror. And in the reflection, Clara saw not herself, but the hollow-eyed version of her that had haunted her nightmare. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had never truly left the nightmare. The velvet door had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many others. She was trapped, her soul bound to the doorway, forced to wander the nightmares of others for eternity. The velvet door still stands in the heart of Eldridge, its secrets hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Those who pass by it feel a chill, a sense of unease, but few dare to enter. And for those who do, the doorway offers a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human mind, a journey into the nightmares of others, from which there is no escape. Clara's story is just one of many. The velvet door continues to lure the curious, the desperate, and the brave, feeding on their fears and trapping their souls. It is a place where reality and nightmare collide, a doorway that leads not to another world, but to the horrors that lie within us all. And so the legend of the velvet door lives on, a cautionary tale for those who dare to seek the unknown. For once you step through the doorway, there is no turning back. You become a part of the nightmare, forever lost in the labyrinth of fear, the doorway that leads into someone else's nightmare. In a remote coastal region, where jagged cliffs met the endless expanse of the sea, there lay a town unlike any other. Its name was Marisora, and it was a place of breathtaking beauty and haunting mystery. By day, Marisora was a bustling fishing village, its streets alive with the sounds of laughter, trade, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first light of dawn approached, the town underwent a transformation. The tide would rise, not just to the edges of the town, but over it, swallowing it whole. By dawn, Marisora would be submerged, its buildings, streets, and people resting beneath the ocean's surface, as if in a deep, enchanted slumber. When the tide receded at dusk, the town would emerge once more, untouched by the water, its inhabitants unaware of their nightly submersion. The phenomenon had been occurring for as long as anyone could remember. The townsfolk of Marisora accepted it as a natural part of their lives, though they rarely spoke of it to outsiders. They believed the town was blessed, or perhaps cursed, by the sea gods, who demanded their nightly tribute. The ocean was both their provider and their captor, a force of life and mystery that they revered and feared in equal measure. Visitors to Marisora were rare, for the town's secret was closely guarded. But those who did stumble upon it often left with more questions than answers, their minds haunted by the sight of a town that slept beneath the waves. The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had come to Marisora seeking refuge. She was a wanderer, a woman with no home and no ties, her past shrouded in mystery. Alara had heard whispers of Marisora during her travels, a town that disappeared at dawn, a place where the sea and land were one. Intrigued and desperate for a place to rest, she made her way to the coast, following the faint scent of salt and the distant cries of gulls. When she arrived, the town was as vibrant as any other seaside village. Fishermen mended their nets, children played in the streets, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and smoked fish. Alara was welcomed with cautious smiles, the townsfolk eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She found lodging at a small inn, run by an elderly couple, who warned her to stay indoors after sunset. "The sea claims us at dawn," the old man said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's not a sight for outsiders." Alara nodded, though her curiosity burned brighter than ever. She had always been drawn to the unknown, and the mystery of Marisora was too compelling to ignore. That night, Alara waited until the inn was silent, then slipped out into the streets. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the town. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the sound of the waves was louder than ever. Alara made her way to the edge of the town, where the cliffs met the sea. She watched as the tide began to rise, its dark waters creeping up the shore. At first, it seemed like an ordinary high tide, but as the hours passed, the water continued to rise, flowing into the streets and pooling around the buildings. Alara's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The town was being swallowed by the sea. She ran back to the inn, her footsteps splashing in the rising water. By the time she reached her room, the water was up to her ankles. She climbed onto the bed, her heart pounding, and watched as the water continued to rise. The townsfolk were nowhere to be seen, their homes silent and dark. As the first light of dawn approached, the water reached the ceiling. Alara took a deep breath and closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But when the water enveloped her, she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace, as if she were being cradled by the sea. When Alara opened her eyes, she was no longer in the inn. She was standing on the ocean floor, surrounded by the submerged town. The buildings were intact, their surfaces covered in seaweed and coral. Fish swam through the streets, and the water was filled with a soft glow of bioluminescent creatures. The townsfolk were there too, their bodies floating gently as if in a deep sleep. Alara moved through the town, her footsteps silent in the water. She felt no need to breathe, no fear of drowning. It was as if the sea had accepted her, made her a part of its world. As she explored, she noticed something strange. The town was not just submerged, it was alive. The buildings seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic light, and the water was filled with the sound of distant singing. Alara followed the sound, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She found the source of the singing in the center of the town, a massive, ancient tree, its branches reaching up toward the surface. The tree was covered in glowing moss, and its roots were entwined with the foundations of the buildings. At its base was a figure, a woman, her hair flowing like seaweed, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Welcome, wanderer," the woman said, her voice echoing in the water. "You have found the heart of Marisora." Ilara's heart raced. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I am the spirit of the sea, the guardian of this town. Marisora is my creation, a place where the land and sea are one. Each night, the town returns to me, its people resting beneath the waves. It is a gift and a curse, Ilara's mind raced with questions. Why do you do this? What do you want from them? The spirit's expression grew somber. The sea gives life, but it also takes it. The people of Marisora have always lived by the sea, and they have always paid its price. This is their tribute, a nightly reminder of the power of the ocean and the bond they share with it. Elara spent what felt like hours talking to the spirit, learning the secrets of Marisora and the sea. But as the sun began to rise, the spirit warned her that it was time to go. The town will awaken soon, she said. You must return to the surface, or you will be trapped here forever. Elara nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of leaving. She had found a sense of peace in the submerged town, a connection to something greater than herself. As she made her way back to the inn, the water began to recede. The town emerged from the sea, its buildings and streets untouched by the water. The townsfolk awoke, their memories of the night erased, and the day began anew. Elara stayed in Marisora for many months, her curiosity and love for the town growing with each passing day. She became a part of the community, her wanderer's heart finally finding a place to rest. But she never forgot what she had seen beneath the waves, and she often returned to the cliffs at night, watching as the town was swallowed by the sea. The spirit of the sea visited her in her dreams, their conversations filled with wisdom and mystery. Elara knew that she would never fully understand the secrets of Marisora, but she was content to be a part of its story. The town of Marisora remained a place of wonder and mystery, its nightly submersion a testament to the power of the sea and the bond between land and water. And though its secrets were closely guarded, its legacy endured, a reminder of the beauty and danger of the ocean and the enduring spirit of those who live by its grace. For in the end, Marisora was not just a town, but a living, breathing testament to the mysteries of the world and the courage it takes to embrace them. In the heart of a sprawling ancient city, there stood a clock tower unlike any other. Known as the Kronos Spire, it was a towering structure of weathered stone and intricate ironwork, its face adorned with golden hands that moved with a precision that defied explanation. The clock tower was the city's most iconic landmark, its chimes echoing through the streets at every hour, marking the passage of time with an almost sentient awareness. But the Kronos Spire was more than just a timekeeper. It was a place of mystery and power. It was said that the tower had the ability to turn shadows into reality, transforming the fleeting, intangible darkness into solid living forms. These shadow creatures would roam the city at night, their presence both a wonder and a terror to those who encountered them. The origins of the Kronos Spire were lost to time, its creation shrouded in myth and legend. Some said it had been built by a mad inventor who had sought to control time itself. Others believed it was a gift from the gods, a tool to remind mortals of the fleeting nature of existence. Whatever its origins, the tower had become a symbol of the city's duality, a place where beauty and danger coexisted, where the line between reality and illusion blurred. The story begins with a young woman named Lila, who had come to the city seeking a fresh start. She was an artist, her mind filled with visions of beauty and wonder. But her life had been marked by tragedy. Her family had been lost to a fire, their home reduced to ashes, and Lila had spent years wandering, searching for a place where she could rebuild her life. When she arrived in the city and saw the Kronos Spire, she felt an immediate connection to it. The tower's grandeur and mystery spoke to her soul, and she knew she had found her new home. Lila rented a small apartment near the tower, its windows offering a perfect view of the golden hands as they moved across the clock face. She spent her days sketching the tower, her hands moving almost of their own accord as she tried to capture its essence on paper. But no matter how many times she drew it, she could never quite capture the feeling it evoked, the sense of timelessness, of power, of something just beyond her understanding. One night, as Lila sat by her window, She noticed something strange. The shadows cast by the tower seemed to move on their own, shifting and writhing like living things. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as she watched, the shadows began to take shape. They formed into figures, humanoid but not quite human, their forms fluid and dark. Lila's heart raced as she realized what she was seeing. The legends were true. The Chronos spire could turn shadows into reality. The shadow creatures moved through the streets, their movements graceful and silent. Lila watched in awe as they interacted with the city, their presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. She felt a strange pull, a desire to understand them, to capture their essence in her art. The next morning, Lila ventured into the city, her sketchbook in hand. She asked the locals about the shadow creatures, but they either avoided her questions or dismissed them as mere superstition. It was as if the city had collectively agreed to ignore the tower's power, to pretend that the shadows were nothing more than tricks of the light. But Lila couldn't ignore them. She spent her nights watching the shadows, her days sketching what she saw. The more she observed, the more she began to notice patterns. The shadow creatures were not random. They seemed to reflect the emotions and memories of the city's inhabitants. A shadow shaped like a child might appear near a grieving mother, while a shadow in the form of a soldier might linger near a war memorial. The tower was not just turning shadows into reality, it was giving form to the city's collective consciousness. As Lila delved deeper into the mystery of the Chronos spire, she began to experience strange phenomena. Her sketches would come to life, the lines on the paper shifting and moving, as if they had a will of their own. She would hear whispers in the night, voices that spoke of forgotten memories and hidden truths. And sometimes when she looked in the mirror, she would see not her own reflection, but a shadowy figure staring back at her. One night, as Lila sat by her window, she heard a voice, a soft, insidious whisper that seemed to come from the tower itself. "Why do you watch?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Lila's heart raced. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the shadows outside her window began to converge, forming a single figure. A woman, her form fluid and dark, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure stepped into Lila's apartment, her movements graceful and silent. "You have seen the truth," the shadow woman said, her voice echoing in the small room. "The tower's power is not just to create, but to reveal. It shows us what we fear, what we desire, what we have lost." Lila's mind raced with questions. Why? What does it want? The shadow woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "The tower is a mirror, a reflection of the city's soul. It shows us what we cannot see, what we refuse to acknowledge. But its power comes with a price. The more you see, the more you risk losing yourself to the shadows." Over the following weeks, Lila became obsessed with the tower and its shadows. She spent her nights wandering the city, her sketchbook in hand, capturing the shadow creatures in her art. But as she delved deeper, she began to notice changes in herself. Her hands were stained with ink, her skin pale and translucent. Her dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering her name, a tower that turned shadows into reality. One night, as she wandered the streets, she heard the voice again. "Why do you seek the truth?" it asked, its tone filled with malice. Lila's heart raced. "I seek the truth because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I seek the truth because it is a part of me." The shadows converged, their forms shifting and writhing as if alive. Lila felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. She stumbled back, her hands trembling, and reached for her sketchbook. But when she opened it, the pages were blank, the lines and shapes she had drawn gone without a trace. Desperate to escape, Lila began to search the city for answers. She examined every inch of the streets, the buildings, the tower itself, but found nothing. The city was empty, save for the shadows and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then she noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the tower's foundation. She knelt down and pried the stones apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the tower's previous keeper, a man who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The tower is alive," he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Lila's heart sank. She knew what she had to do. She sat in the center of the tower, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, trying to calm her racing heart. The tower seemed to pulse around her, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you seek the truth?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Lila took a deep breath. "I seek the truth because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I seek the truth because it is a part of me." The tower erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the shadows converging into a single, massive form. Lila felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were tearing her apart. But she held her ground, her resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The tower was silent, the air still and heavy. Lila opened her eyes and found herself standing in the center of the room, the journal in her hands. Its surface was clean, the shadows gone, and its pages shimmered like a pool of water. The tower remained in the city, its power dormant once more. Lila left the city, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had experienced. She knew the tower was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths. But she also knew that she had faced it, and that was enough. The city was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the tower's haunting shadows. And though the tower's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the Chronos Spire was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown. In a quiet, forgotten village nestled deep within a misty valley, there was a legend about a window unlike any other. It was a small, unassuming pane of glass set into the wall of an abandoned cottage at the edge of the forest. The window was known as the ethereal pane, and it was said to show scenes from forgotten futures, visions of what could have been, what might have been, and what never was. Those who gazed into its depths would see glimpses of alternate realities, their lives unfolding in ways they could never have imagined. But the window was not without its dangers. It was said that those who looked too closely risked losing themselves to its visions, their minds and souls consumed by the weight of what could have been. The ethereal pain had been passed down through generations, its origins lost to time. It was kept in the village's oldest house, a crumbling structure of stone and ivy that stood at the edge of the forest. The house was inhabited by an elderly woman named Marin, who had been the window's keeper for as long as anyone could remember. Marin rarely spoke of the window, but when she did, her words were filled with a mixture of reverence and warning. "The window is not a toy," she would say. "It shows the future, but the future can be a dangerous thing." The story begins with a young man named Kyle, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. He had grown up hearing tales of the ethereal pain, but he had never seen it for himself. His grandmother, a wise and enigmatic woman, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its beauty and danger. Cale had always been fascinated by the window, but he had never had the courage to seek it out until now. His return to the village was not by choice. His father, a farmer who had spent his life toiling in the shadow of the forest, had fallen ill with a sickness that no healer could cure. Desperate to save him, Cale's thoughts turned to the window. He had heard stories of its power to reveal hidden truths, and he wondered if it could show him a way to heal his father. One stormy evening, Kyle made his way to Marin's house. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, and the wind carried with it the faint sound of whispers. The house loomed before him, its stone walls covered in ivy, and its wooden doors weathered with age. He pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The interior of the house was as grand as it was decayed. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, the floors covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was cold and still, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the cracked windows. Kyle made his way through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence, until he found Marin. The elderly woman was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace, her eyes sharp and piercing as she studied Cale. "You've come for the window," she said, her voice low and gravelly. Kyle nodded, his heart pounding. "I need to see it. My father, he's dying. I have to know if the window can help him." Marin studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "The window is not what you think. It doesn't just reveal the future, it consumes it. Once you gaze into its depths, there's no going back. Are you prepared to face that?" Cale hesitated, then nodded. "I have to know." Marin led him to a small, dimly lit room in the back of the house. The window sat on a pedestal, its surface gleaming in the flickering light of a single candle. Kyle approached it cautiously, his fingers brushing against the smooth glass. The moment he touched it, he felt a strange sensation, as if something were reaching into him, pulling at his thoughts and memories. He lifted the window, its weight heavy in his hands, and gazed into its depths. The moment he did, the room was filled with whispers, soft, insidious voices that spoke in a language long lost to time. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until Cale could make out words. "Help us," they said, their voices a chorus of sighs and murmurs. "Set us free." Kyle's heart raced. He knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes and focused on the whispers, his mind and soul consumed by their stories. The future unfolded before him like a tapestry, each thread a memory, each memory a life. Over the following days, Cale became obsessed with the window. He gazed into its depths day and night, his mind filled with its haunting echoes. The villagers listened in awe and fear, their faces pale with the weight of the window's power. But Cale didn't care. The future was all that mattered. As he listened to the echoes, he began to notice changes in himself. His hands were stained with ink, his skin pale and translucent. His dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering his name, a window that showed scenes from forgotten futures. One night, as he gazed into the window, he heard the voice. It was soft and insidious, barely audible, but it sent a chill down his spine. "Why do you gaze?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Kyle's heart raced. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the echoes grew louder, more insistent, until they reached a fever pitch. Kyle felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were reaching into him, pulling at his thoughts and memories. He stumbled back, his hands trembling, and reached for the window. But when he touched it, the room erupted in chaos. The walls shook, the air filled with the sound of screams, and the window's surface rippled like water, its echoes distorting into grotesque shapes. Desperate to escape, Kyle began to search the house for answers. He examined every inch of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. The house was empty, save for the window and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then he noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the floorboards. He knelt down and pried the boards apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the window's previous owner, a historian who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The window is alive," he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Kel's heart sank. He knew what he had to do. He sat in the center of the house, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, trying to calm his racing heart. The house seemed to pulse around him, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you gaze?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Kel took a deep breath. "I gaze because I must," he replied, his voice steady. "I gaze because it is a part of me." The house erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the window's surface rippling like water. Kel felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were tearing him apart. But he held his ground, his resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The house was silent, the air still and heavy. Cal opened his eyes and found himself standing in the center of the room, the window in his hands. Its surface was clean, the echoes gone, and its glass shimmered like a pool of water. The window remained in the house, its power dormant once more. Kyle left the village, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had experienced. He knew the window was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths, but he also knew that he had faced it, and that was enough. The village was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the window's haunting echoes. And though the window's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the ethereal pain was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown.